The morning started quietly, the way most peaceful mornings usually begin. The sun had just started to climb over the rooftops, spreading soft golden light across the quiet neighborhood. Birds were making small sounds in the trees, and the air felt fresh, cool, and calm. It was one of those mornings that didn't feel rushed. Everything moved slowly, gently, and in a way that made a person feel ready for the day. He stepped out of his house while holding a warm cup of tea. The steam lifted into the air, disappearing quickly as he took a slow sip. He liked starting his day before the rest of the neighborhood got busy. It gave him time to think, breathe, and prepare for the responsibilities waiting for him later. He stood on his driveway for a moment and looked at the sky. Then at his SUV, parked a little further down in the visitor parking area. His own garage was full of construction equipment because he was getting the flooring redone. It was supposed to take a few days, maybe a week, and during that time he had to leave his vehicle outside. He didn't see it as a problem at all. Visitor parking was often empty, and he'd even checked his community rules before parking there. But the truth was, the neighborhood association had changed a few things recently. They had sent out emails and small flyers, but many homeowners said they didn't receive the updates clearly. Some said the messages were too confusing. Some said the rules were changing too fast. And some simply said the HOA board had become too strict, too quickly. But at this moment, he wasn't thinking about any of that. He simply took another sip of tea and enjoyed the quiet. After a few minutes, he walked over to his SUV, unlocked it, and sat behind the wheel. He adjusted his seat, set his cup in the holder, and smiled to himself. The day seemed like it would be easy and straightforward. He started the engine and drove toward the main road. As he passed a few neighbors who were watering their plants or checking their mailboxes, he gave them a friendly nod. Some waved back. Others smiled the way people do when they see someone familiar but don't know much about them. Work that day was calm too. He spent most of the hours going through reports, making phone calls, and meeting a few people who needed advice. His position required him to stay composed and fair. It was never about ego or showing authority. If anything, he liked staying under the radar. He believed real respect wasn't about titles, it came from how a person behaved and treated others. By the time he returned home in the afternoon, the sun had faded into a softer, warmer light. The sky was glowing in shades of orange and purple. He turned into his neighborhood, feeling relaxed and ready to unwind for the evening. But as soon as he approached the visitor parking area, something bright caught his eye. An orange sticker. A very large, very bright sticker stuck on the driver's window of his SUV. He parked his car slowly and stepped out, feeling confused. He walked over to the sticker and read it carefully. The bold letters said, "Warning" at the top. Beneath it was a message stating that his vehicle was parked in violation of community rules and could be towed if not removed immediately. He frowned softly. This didn't make sense. He knew he was allowed to park there because he had approval for short-term use while his garage was under repair. He even had the email saved. So why was he getting a warning? He ran his fingers over the edges of the sticker. It felt frustrating not because of the sticker itself, but because it felt unnecessary. As if someone had made a quick decision without checking any information. A neighbor walking by slowed down and looked at him with sympathy. "Did they put one of those stickers on your car too?" she asked. He looked at her. "Is this happening often?" She nodded. "More and more lately. People are complaining, but the HOA doesn't seem to care. They're giving warnings for the smallest things now. One family got fined because their trash can was out 10 minutes earlier than allowed." He listened quietly. The neighbor sighed heavily and added, "Ever since they changed some board members, it's been strict. Almost too strict. Honestly, people feel scared to park anywhere now." He remained calm, even though he felt an uncomfortable knot forming in his chest. He didn't like unnecessary conflict. He didn't like seeing people treated unfairly, and he definitely didn't like the idea of someone using authority against regular residents without good reason. He thanked the neighbor and told her everything would be all right. Then he went inside his home, placed his bag on the couch, and sat down for a moment. He sighed, but kept his thoughts clear. The best way to handle the situation was simple talk to the HOA the next morning. Show them the approval documents and clear everything up. He didn't want trouble, and he didn't want the situation to turn into something stressful. Later that evening, he walked out again to take one last look at his SUV. The sticker was still there, bright and bold. He gently peeled off one side to check if it would damage the paint or the glass, but luckily it lifted cleanly. He folded it in half and placed it in his pocket. He preferred having it as proof if needed. A couple from down the street walked by and asked what happened. After telling them briefly, they shook their heads. "One of the HOA members is on a power trip," the man whispered. "We've all noticed it. Don't take it personally. They've made a lot of people upset." He nodded, thanked them for stopping to ask, and went back inside. The last thing he wanted was for neighbors to feel like their voices didn't matter. He believed people deserved kindness, patience, and understanding. Rules were fine, necessary even, but they should never be used as a tool for intimidation. He slept that night thinking the issue would be resolved by morning. He didn't expect anything dramatic. He didn't expect things to escalate. And he definitely didn't expect the next day to be completely different from anything he had imagined. But he was wrong. The next morning, he woke early again, feeling refreshed. He opened the curtains, stretched, and walked into the kitchen to pour himself another warm cup of tea. The sky outside looked peaceful, like every other morning. For a brief moment, it felt like everything was normal again. He stepped outside, feeling the slight breeze brush against his face. He took a slow sip of tea. Then he began walking toward his SUV, expecting to get inside and drive to his appointment, but he never reached the car. Halfway down the driveway, he froze. His SUV wasn't alone anymore. A tow truck had pulled up beside it. The large vehicle was angled slightly, with metal arms already close to the tires. A man in a reflective vest was adjusting chains and equipment. Beside him stood two people holding clipboards, the HOA members. One of them pointed at the SUV, speaking in a sharp tone. The other nodded with a serious expression, tapping a pen as if checking off a task. The tow truck's engine hummed loudly. The scene felt tense. Too tense for a quiet morning. He felt his heart tighten, not out of fear, but from disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not without any proper discussion. Not without even asking him for an explanation. He took a deep breath, placed his cup down on the edge of the driveway, and began walking toward them. Every step felt heavier than the last. As he got closer, the voices became clearer. The HOA members were telling the tow truck driver to get it done. Quickly, and don't wait for anyone to come. Out. He reached them, just as the tow driver was about to lower the metal hook near the back tire. "What's going on here?" he asked calmly. The two HOA members turned around, their expressions stern and impatient, as if they had been waiting for someone to challenge them. One of them narrowed her eyes, clearly annoyed that he had come outside before they could finish. Just like that. Part 1 ends with quiet tension, the kind that hints everything is about to change. The moment he spoke, the tension in the air changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it felt like everything paused for a second. The two HOA members looked at him the way someone looks at a problem they thought they could avoid. Their shoulders stiffened, and the tow truck driver turned slightly, lowering his tools, but not stepping back yet. He repeated himself, this time even calmer than before. "I'm asking what's happening here." One of the HOA members, a woman with a short haircut and a stiff expression, stepped forward. She didn't smile, didn't offer any greeting. She simply pointed her pen toward the SUV and said, "Your vehicle is being removed. It's parked in a restricted area." The second HOA member, a tall man with a cold look, added, "We already gave a warning. There is no reason for further discussion." Even though they tried to sound confident, their tone carried something else, impatience mixed with a sense of superiority, as if they were used to giving orders and not being questioned. He looked at the bright orange sticker still stuck to the side window, the one he had peeled off the day before and placed in his pocket. He reached into his pocket and held it up gently. "I received this yesterday," he said, "and I was planning to talk to the HOA this morning. There seems to be a misunderstanding. I have approval to park here temporarily." The woman crossed her arms. "We don't have records of that." He nodded, keeping his voice steady. "Maybe someone forgot to update the system. It happens. But I can show you the documents. The tall man shook his head sharply. It's too late for that. We already made the decision. The tow truck driver looked uneasy. He glanced from the SUV to the HOA members, then to the man standing in front of him. The driver didn't seem eager to continue, but the HOA members pushed him silently with their aggressive tone and posture. He took a slow breath. He didn't want the situation to turn into an argument. He simply wanted to resolve it with patience. That was the way he handled everything, slowly, respectfully, and without raising his voice. But the two HOA members didn't seem to appreciate calmness. In fact, the calmer he stayed, the more irritated they appeared. He stepped closer, not angrily, but clearly enough to show he wasn't going to walk away without understanding their actions. "Can I speak to someone higher in the board?" he asked. The woman scoffed. "You're speaking to us. That's enough." The man with the clipboard added, "And if you keep delaying the process, we'll add a fine on top of the tow charges." The words didn't bother him personally, but he could feel the unfairness dripping from them. It wasn't just about him. It was about every resident who had probably dealt with this attitude. The way the HOA members stood, the way they spoke, the way they dismissed explanations, everything felt like they enjoyed forcing people to follow rules they barely explained. His voice remained calm. "I'm not delaying anything. I'm trying to show you that I have approval." The woman lifted her chin slightly. "You should have shown it earlier. Now, we're moving forward." The tow truck driver shifted uncomfortably and rubbed the back of his neck. "Ma'am, maybe we can give him a minute too." Before he could finish, the woman turned on him sharply. "You were hired to follow instructions, not to negotiate." The driver lowered his eyes and went quiet. It was clear he didn't want trouble either. A small group of neighbors had begun gathering near the sidewalk. They whispered to each other, shaking their heads. Some of them had experienced similar treatment. One elderly man muttered softly, "This is getting out of hand." Another neighbor leaned toward someone beside her and whispered, "They really don't know who they're talking to." He heard the whispers but didn't react. He didn't want to reveal anything. He wanted the HOA members to do the right thing, because it was right, not because of who he was. But the HOA members weren't interested in doing the right thing. The tall man motioned to the tow truck driver. "Go ahead. Lift it." The driver hesitated. You could see the conflict in his eyes. He wasn't a bad person. He wasn't trying to cause trouble. He just needed to earn his paycheck like everyone else. Slowly, reluctantly, he moved back toward the truck controls. He took one step forward, placing himself between the SUV and the tow driver, not in an aggressive way, but in a firm, undeniably present way. "Before you lift anything," he said, "I need you both to understand something." The woman clicked her tongue impatiently. "We don't need to understand anything. You're in violation." "But I'm not," he said, "and I can prove it." The tall man waved his hand dismissively. "We don't care what you think you can prove. The decision has already been made," the woman added, "and we're not obligated to listen to explanations from residents who don't follow rules." He raised his eyebrows slightly. "I didn't break any rule," the woman smirked. "You're parked in visitor parking. My garage is under repair," he said. "I have approval. Where's the proof?" she demanded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Right here." The tall man slapped his clipboard against his hand. "We said we're not reviewing anything at this point." That was the moment the neighbors reacted. A few murmurs rose from the group. "That's not fair," someone said softly. "You should at least look at the documents," another added. But the HOA members ignored them. They refused to even take a single glance at the proof. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was about control. The tow truck driver finally activated the lift. The metal arms moved slowly, rising toward the SUV's tires. The man felt his patience thinning, not in anger, but in disappointment. He had always tried to stay understanding. He had always tried to believe that most people act with logic and fairness. But watching the way these board members behaved made him realize something important. They didn't want fairness. They wanted authority. They wanted obedience. He knew he had to stop this, but he also didn't want to attack or embarrass anyone. He wanted to give them one last chance to handle things properly. "You're making a mistake," he said softly. The woman rolled her eyes. Everyone says that when they get caught. I'm not caught, he replied gently. You are simply uninformed. The tall man stepped forward, his voice raised slightly. Listen, we don't care who you think you are. Rules are rules. He noticed something strange in the man's tone, a hint of pride. Almost like he enjoyed the idea of exerting power over a resident. And we don't owe you any special treatment, the man added sharply. He nodded slowly. I didn't ask for special treatment. I asked for fairness. The tall man leaned closer. Well, you're not getting it. The neighbors gasped. They had heard everything. The disrespect wasn't hidden anymore. It was blatant. The tow truck's arms were now inches from the SUV's wheels. He looked at the tow driver. Please stop for a moment. The driver swallowed hard. Sir, I'm sorry, but if I stop now, they'll blame me. It's okay, he said gently. I'm not angry with you. The driver hesitated, then let go of the lever. Choosing caution over obedience for a small moment, that tiny pause irritated the HOA members even more. Why are you stopping? The woman snapped. We gave an order. The driver looked down. I think he deserves at least a minute. You don't decide that, she shouted. Her voice echoed through the quiet street. Even birds flew off nearby branches. Startled by the sharp sound, the man took advantage of that moment of silence. He reached into his pocket, not quickly, not dramatically. He pulled out his wallet and opened it. He didn't hold it aggressively. He simply extended it slightly toward them. If you won't look at the parking approval, he said softly, at least look at this. The woman snatched the ID without thinking, prepared to roll her eyes again, but she didn't roll her eyes. She froze. Her face drained of all color. Her hands trembled ever so slightly. For a moment, she seemed speechless. Unable to form words, the tall man leaned in to see what she was looking at. The second he saw it, his expression changed too. The confidence, the arrogance, the sharp tone, all of it disappeared almost instantly. The neighbors watched closely. Confused at first, then curious. The tow truck driver peered over the clipboard, wondering what could possibly cause such a sudden shift. The HOA members looked at him with wide eyes, because now they understood who he was, and they realized they had just argued, dismissed, and disrespected the one person they should have spoken to with proper care. The moment felt heavy, like the entire street held its breath. And part 2 ends, exactly at the point where their expressions change. But nothing has been said yet. When the 2 HOA members stared at the ID, the silence around them became almost uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that made even the flowers planted along the sidewalk seem still, like they were waiting to see what would happen next. The woman holding the ID blinked a few times, as if her eyes were trying to convince her mind that she was actually reading the words printed on the card correctly. The tall man leaned in closer. His posture changed from confident to unsettled. The neighbors standing nearby watched quietly, confused but curious. They couldn't see what was written on the ID, but they could see the sudden shift in the HOA members' expressions. Even the tow truck driver stopped fidgeting with his equipment. He slowly stepped back, waiting for someone else to speak first. The woman finally lowered the ID slightly, but she still looked unsure of how to respond. Her voice wasn't sharp or loud anymore. It was soft and shaky. Why didn't you tell us sooner? He didn't smile. He didn't raise his tone. He simply said, because it shouldn't matter who someone is. You should treat everyone with basic respect. His words were gentle, but they hit the air with surprising weight. The woman looked down, unable to hold his gaze. The tall man swallowed hard and tried to straighten his posture again, but his confidence had disappeared. He asked quietly, why didn't you say anything earlier? Because I wanted to handle this like any other resident, he said. I didn't expect it to turn into this. The woman opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The embarrassment on her face was clear. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was realization. She understood, perhaps for the first time, that power used carelessly doesn't make someone respectable. It makes them feared. And fear is never the same thing as respect. A soft voice came from the group of neighbors. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" The HOA members didn't answer. They couldn't. The tall man seemed to have lost his ability to speak altogether. The tow truck driver took a cautious step toward him. "Sir, do you want me to stop everything?" He nodded calmly. "Yes, please put the equipment away." "Thank you." The driver exhaled with relief and began retracting the metal arms slowly, almost gratefully. It was clear he felt uncomfortable being caught in the middle of something he didn't fully understand while the driver worked. The woman finally found the strength to say something. "We didn't know who you were." "If we had known," he interrupted gently, not out of rudeness, but clarity. "That's exactly my point. Why would it matter?" She opened her mouth again but paused. Her expression softened, and for the first time since the morning began, she seemed less like someone hiding behind rules and more like someone realizing she made a mistake. The tall man mumbled, "This wasn't supposed to happen this way." "It didn't have to," he replied. "All you had to do was look at the documents." The neighbors nodded quietly. They had watched everything. They had felt the unfairness from the beginning. Many of them probably wished they had stepped forward earlier, but didn't want to get involved. People often stay quiet, even when they know something is wrong, because they fear the consequences. The tow truck driver finished lowering the equipment completely and walked toward him. "Sir, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. They told me you were ignoring rules." He offered him a warm, understanding look. "You were doing your job. It's okay." The driver let out a relieved breath and nodded. He wiped his hands on his vest and stepped aside, giving space for the conversation that clearly needed to happen. The woman still held his ID, as though she wasn't sure how to return it. She stepped forward slowly, the way someone walks when they know they've gone too far. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "We didn't mean for this too." He gently held up a hand. "You can return the card." She placed it carefully in his hand, avoiding eye contact. He tucked it back into his wallet silently. The tall man finally regained his voice. "Look, we don't want any problems. Maybe we can work this out." He nodded. "That's what I tried to do from the start." His tone wasn't harsh. It wasn't bitter. It was simply the truth. And somehow, the truth itself seemed to sting more than anger ever could. The tall man rubbed his forehead and exhaled. "We just want the community to follow rules." "There's nothing wrong with rules," he said. "But rules without fairness turn into control." Some neighbors nodded again. A few whispered softly, agreeing. The woman seemed to take the comment personally. "We weren't trying to control anyone." He looked at her calmly. "Maybe not intentionally, but that's how it felt." She looked down again. There was no defense she could offer that would make sense now. Another neighbor slowly walked forward from the small group. He was an older man, gentle-faced, the kind of neighbor who always waved at everyone. He spoke softly. "We've all been feeling this way. The new rules. They've been too strict, too sudden, and there hasn't been room to explain anything." The tall HOA member tried to respond. "We're just doing what we think is best." The older man smiled kindly but shook his head. "Doing what's best means listening to, not just enforcing." The woman's shoulders sank slightly. She looked tired, as if the weight of her own decisions had finally landed on her. He wasn't enjoying their discomfort. He didn't want them to feel scared. He wanted them to understand why respect matters. Why? Treating people kindly matters even more than following rules. He spoke softly. "Look, I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm not here to punish anyone either. I just wanted my car left alone until my garage repair is finished. That's all." The tall man lowered his clipboard. "We should have listened." He nodded gently. "Yes, you should have." The woman pressed her lips together and finally said something honest. "I think we've been too strict. Maybe we took some of this too seriously." He didn't reply immediately. He let her words settle into the air. Sometimes silence teaches more than any speech could. After a moment, he finally said, "Everyone makes mistakes. It's not about perfection. It's about willingness to correct them." The woman looked relieved, as if she expected him to be angry or to threaten consequences. Instead, He offered, understanding something she clearly wasn't used to receiving from residents. The tall man stepped forward hesitantly. So, do we forget the tow order? He gave him a calm look. Of course. There was no reason for it. The man glanced over at the tow driver and nodded. Thank you. You can go. The tow truck driver gave one final nod, then climbed into his truck. The engine started with a soft rumble. He gave the man a small, respectful wave before pulling slowly out of the neighborhood. The sound of the truck fading away made the area feel peaceful again. Like the morning had reset itself, the neighbors began to disperse. Some waved at him with soft smiles. Others nodded gratefully. A few whispered to each other, still trying to make sense of everything they had witnessed. He stayed standing in the same spot, watching the HOA members as they avoided his eyes. They didn't walk away immediately. They lingered awkwardly, as if unsure whether to apologize again or simply leave. He decided to help them, not by scolding, but by offering closure. He spoke with gentle firmness. I hope this becomes a moment for change. Not just for me, but for everyone here. The woman nodded slowly. It will, the tall man added quietly. We'll review the rules again, and maybe talk to the board about how we've been handling things. That's good, he said. People just want to feel heard. The woman looked up at him. Are you going to file a complaint? He shook his head. No, I don't need to, but I do expect things to improve. She nodded quickly, almost gratefully. She seemed relieved that he didn't want to make the situation worse or create drama. She looked like someone who had been given a chance to correct her mistake instead of being condemned for it. The tall man cleared his throat. We'll do better. He gave them a soft, genuine nod. I hope so. With that, the two HOA members stepped aside and walked slowly back toward their office building. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't speak to anyone. They simply walked quietly, absorbing everything that had just happened. He turned toward his SUV. It sat exactly where it had been before, untouched. The morning sun reflected off the windshield, making it look almost peaceful again. He picked up the cup of tea he had left on the driveway earlier. It was cold now, but he held it anyway. He stood still for a few moments, taking in the calmness that had returned to the neighborhood. A neighbor walking by stopped near him. That was something, the man said softly. I've never seen them act like that before. He smiled faintly. Hopefully you won't see it again. The neighbor chuckled. I think they learned a lesson today. He didn't respond. Instead, he took a slow breath and looked around the neighborhood he cared about. He didn't like conflict. He didn't like attention. But sometimes life brings situations that show people who you really are not, because you reveal yourself. But because they revealed themselves first, he walked back inside his house, closing the door behind him with a gentle click. The quiet of his home wrapped around him like a soft blanket. He set his cold tea on the counter and sat down for a moment. The day wasn't over. The situation wasn't completely resolved. But something important had shifted. Tomorrow, things would be different. The next morning came faster than he expected. Most nights he slept deeply, but that night had been different. He had gone to bed tired, but his mind stayed awake, replaying every little detail from the day before. The sound of the tow truck's engine, the way the driver kept scratching his head, the look on the HOA president's face when she realized who he was. Every moment hovered in his thoughts like a ceiling fan that wouldn't turn off, but he woke up feeling strangely calm, almost as if something inside him had settled overnight. When he stepped into the kitchen, the sun was just beginning to climb up the sky. Light filtered in through the blinds, hitting the countertop at an angle that made everything look softer. He brewed coffee the same way he always did, but as he took the first sip, he felt a quiet shift inside him. It wasn't excitement or anger. It was more like he finally had a clear picture of what needed to be done. He knew he couldn't just let the situation fade away. Not because of pride or authority, but because something about it didn't feel right. Rules were rules, and he respected them. But rules had to be fair. They had to make sense. And there had to be room for communication. What he experienced the day before wasn't a rule being enforced, it was a rush to show power. He walked to the window and looked at the parking lot. His vehicle sat exactly where it had been yesterday morning, looking harmless and ordinary. That was the part that bothered him. It wasn't blocking anyone. It wasn't parked illegally. He had even placed the temporary pass on the dashboard. So why had the HOA decided to go after him so aggressively? He rubbed the back of his neck slowly, thinking he decided he would talk to someone not in anger. And not to scare them with his position, but to understand. The truth was he didn't want anyone else in the neighborhood to go through the same thing. Some people might not have the confidence or the knowledge to stand up for themselves. Some might simply surrender because they assumed the HOA knew better. And just like that, someone could be punished unfairly. After finishing his coffee, he took a slow walk outside, stretching his shoulders as he stepped into the fresh morning air. A few neighbors were already out, one walking a small dog, another sweeping leaves away from their doorway, and someone else tossing a bag of trash into the shared bin. He offered polite waves here and there, receiving a few in return. People acted friendly, but he couldn't help noticing that some looked away a little too quickly. As though unsure of how to greet him after what they witnessed, he didn't take it personally. When something dramatic happens, people always form little stories in their minds. Some exaggerate, some guess, and some stay neutral. Human nature rarely changes. He kept walking toward the small office located near the entrance of the community. That was where the HOA usually held their meetings. The building wasn't large, just a single room with glass windows on both sides, a few plastic chairs, and a small desk. When he reached the door, he paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before knocking. A soft voice answered, telling him to come in. Inside, a young woman sat behind the desk, typing something quickly on her laptop. She looked up when she saw him and blinked nervously. It was clear she recognized him from yesterday. She straightened her posture immediately and offered a stiff smile. He returned a gentle smile and explained why he was there. He asked simple questions. Who had reported his car? What processed the HOA followed before ordering a tow, and whether a warning was usually issued. The woman hesitated at first, probably unsure of how much she was allowed to say, but his calm tone seemed to ease her worry. Eventually, she told him the truth. The complaint had come from only two people, one board member and one resident. They believed his temporary pass was invalid because it didn't match the color used in the previous month. Even though the HOA had switched designs recently, they assumed the one on his dashboard wasn't real. Instead of knocking on his door or leaving a note on his windshield, the board member had immediately called for a tow. He listened quietly, nodding here and there. It made sense, in a way. Miscommunication, wrong assumptions. A system that wasn't organized well enough, but then he asked the part he really needed to understand. Why didn't anyone double-check before calling the tow company? The woman lowered her eyes and spoke carefully. From what she knew, the board member in question had been frustrated lately because several residents ignored parking rules. She thought enforcing the rules strictly would set an example. Fortunately, it seemed his vehicle had become the example. He didn't know whether to sigh or laugh. People often made decisions based more on frustration than fairness. He thanked the woman for her honesty and left without making her uncomfortable. She looked relieved, as though she had expected a confrontation, but got kindness instead. He walked back home with a lot to think about. Later that afternoon, he received a knock on his door. When he opened it, the HOA president stood outside, holding a folder close to her chest. Looked embarrassed but determined. She apologized. Not quickly or casually, but slowly, sincerely, and with a tone that showed she had replayed the incident in her mind many times. She explained that she had spoken with the other board members and realized the situation could have been handled very differently. They shouldn't have rushed. They shouldn't have assumed. And they definitely shouldn't have ignored the pass he had. Displayed, he listened to every word patiently. She asked if they could sit somewhere and talk. He agreed, and they walked to a nearby bench under a tall tree that cast a wide shadow. The air was warm and small birds hopped around on the grass. Searching for crumbs, she shared how the HOA had been under pressure lately. Some residents complained too often, while others ignored the rules completely. The board was split. Some wanted strict enforcement, some wanted flexibility. In the middle of all this, frustration had built up, and decision-making had become foggy. As she talked, he could tell she wasn't trying to make excuses. She was trying to explain. He told her calmly that he understood. But he also told her what he believed: power, no matter how small or big, has to be used responsibly. People trust leaders to be fair, not impulsive. And when a mistake happens, owning it quickly makes all the difference. She nodded slowly, as though each word settled in her thoughts. Then she did something he didn't expect. She asked him for advice. Not as an authority figure, not because of his job, because she genuinely wanted to understand how to prevent something like this from happening again. He thought for a moment before responding. He suggested clear communication, consistent rules, warning notices, and a more respectful approach when dealing with residents. He didn't speak like someone teaching a lesson. He spoke like a neighbor who cared about the community. By the time their conversation ended, the tension that had hung between them since the previous day seemed to dissolve. She left with a grateful expression, promising to bring the matter to the next meeting and make improvements. But later that evening, as he sat on his porch, watching the sunset turn everything golden, he realized something else was happening in the neighborhood. People walked by his house with a different energy. Some waved more confidently. Some stopped for small talk, asking if everything had settled. It seemed the entire community had felt the shift. When someone stands up calmly, others feel safer doing the same. He felt lighter than he had the night before. But deep down, he sensed the story wasn't over. Not because something bad was coming, but because something bigger was unfolding, something that would change not just his connection with the HOA, but his place in the community. The mistake that almost caused a tow wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a mirror. It showed him how many people lived with quiet frustration. It showed him how much one mistake could ripple through a neighborhood. And it showed him that sometimes, when people realize who you are, not your job, not your title, but your character, they respond differently. As the wind grew cooler and the sky darkened, he sat still, absorbing the quiet of the evening. Tomorrow, he thought, something important might happen. He could feel it, and for the first time since moving there, he felt ready for whatever came next. The following day began quietly, almost too quietly. He woke up before the alarm again, the sunlight creeping softly into his room, as if the day itself didn't want to disturb him. For a few moments he lay still, listening to the subtle sounds. Outside, the chirping of birds, the distant hum of a car starting, and the soft footsteps of someone walking their dog. It felt peaceful, but not empty. Something about the morning carried a sense of new beginnings, like the start of a chapter he didn't even realize he had been waiting for. After getting dressed, he stepped outside onto the porch, breathing in the fresh air. The sky was clear, wide, and deeply blue. It was the kind of morning that made everything seem possible. As he sipped a warm cup of coffee, he noticed a few neighbors eyeing him with friendly curiosity. Some waved in a way that felt more personal than the day before, while others simply nodded with shy smiles. Their reactions made him chuckle quietly. It was funny how one moment in a simple parking lot had shifted the entire mood of a community. He didn't feel like a hero, nothing close to that. He did feel like someone who people suddenly felt comfortable approaching. Maybe it was because they saw how calmly he handled the situation. Maybe it was because they realized he was just another person trying to live peacefully in the neighborhood. Or maybe it was simply because people like knowing someone responsible is around. Whatever the reason, he didn't mind the attention. It felt natural. Just as he finished his coffee, he heard footsteps approaching. When he turned, he saw the HOA president walking up the path, holding a binder. She looked more relaxed than yesterday, almost relieved. She greeted him politely and asked if he had a moment. He nodded and invited her to sit with him on the porch. She opened the binder and showed him something. It was a draft of a new parking policy, clear guidelines, warnings before action, and a simple system that every resident could follow without confusion. She told him the board had stayed late the night before, talking about everything that had happened. They didn't want to repeat the same mistake. They wanted to rebuild trust. She had brought the draft to him first, not because of his job, but because she said he had handled the whole situation with maturity that inspired the board. She wanted his honest opinion. He read through the pages slowly, appreciating how clean and simple everything was. Nothing felt controlling or aggressive. It felt fair, balanced, human, after reading each section. He nodded with a calm smile and told her it was good, better than what they had before. She seemed genuinely happy to hear it. Before leaving, she thanked him again. But this time her thanks carried a different weight. It wasn't about the tow truck incident. It was about the influence he unknowingly had on the board, the community, and even her own leadership. She said people like him made neighborhoods stronger. He didn't quite know how to respond to that. He simply smiled and told her he appreciated the effort they were putting in. And in that simple exchange, something shifted even further. The tension of the past days had melted into something much warmer: mutual respect. After she left, he decided to take a walk through the community. The air was cool and a few children rode their bikes along the sidewalk. The houses looked more familiar than they had before, as if the place had finally opened itself up to him. He passed the small garden where an older man trimmed bushes each morning, and the man waved at him with a friendly grin. He waved back. As he approached the Central Park area, he saw a small group of neighbors gathered around a picnic table. They looked up when they saw him, and one of them waved enthusiastically, calling him over. He walked toward them, curious. It turned out they were discussing neighborhood improvements, things they wanted to fix, activities they wanted to plan, ideas they hoped the HOA would consider. When he joined, they welcomed him, like he had always been part of their circle. They asked about his thoughts, listened to his suggestions, and even laughed with him as someone joked about how the tow truck story had already become neighborhood history. He laughed with them, shaking his head. People always found humor in things once the tension was gone, but what touched him most was how comfortable. Everyone felt sharing their frustrations and hopes. It showed him something important. People care more than they admit. They just need someone to listen. They just need a place where they feel heard. As the conversations continued, he found himself talking about ways communication could improve, not through strict rules or fear, but through simple, neighborly understanding. He didn't lecture, didn't preach. He just talked like someone who cared about the place where he lived. By the time the group broke apart, the sun was high and bright. Several people thanked him for joining, and a few even invited him to future gatherings. It felt good, deeply good, to be part of something bigger than the tow truck incident. Later that afternoon, he returned home and sat quietly on his porch again, watching people come and go. Something warmed inside him as he saw the small changes, the extra nods, extra smiles, the way people looked less guarded. The neighborhood felt more alive. It's almost like a puzzle that was finally fitting together. He thought about how everything started. A simple misunderstanding, an unnecessary call to a tow company, and the surprise that followed when they learned his identity. It could have ended in anger, resentment, or division. But instead, it had turned into growth for the HOA, for the neighbors, and even for himself. He realized something important. People often react based on the small picture in front of them, not knowing the full story. But when they learn who someone truly is, their values, their calmness, their patience, that changes everything. It doesn't matter what job a person holds or how much authority they have. What matters is character. He sat back, letting that thought settle in his heart. That evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the houses, a few neighbors walked over and greeted him again. A little girl from down the street handed him a small drawing, a simple sketch of a car with a smiling sun above it. He smiled warmly, thanking her. Her mother explained that the girl wanted to cheer him up after the tow truck scare. That made him laugh softly, touched by the innocence behind the gesture. As night approached, he finally stepped inside his home, feeling a calm sense of belonging he hadn't felt before. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, no community was, but it was a place full of people trying to do better, and that was enough. He sat near the window, looking out at the quiet street. Porch lights glowed softly. Leaves rustled lightly in the breeze. Somewhere in the distance, someone played gentle music. It all felt peaceful. He thought again about the moment when the tow truck driver realized who he was. The wide eyes, the sudden pause, the nervous apology, all seemed so dramatic at the time. But now, thinking back, he smiled slightly. That moment had been the spark, but the change that followed had come from conversation, not authority. As he rested his head back and closed his eyes for a moment, he realized something else. Sometimes life gives you small storms just to clear the air. And after the air clears, everything makes more sense. He took a slow breath, letting the simple truth settle inside him. The day that had begun with tension had ended with understanding. The neighborhood that once felt like a place of rules now felt like a place of people. And the incident that could have caused distance had instead built connection. In a way, the attempted tow wasn't a problem, it was a turning point. And as he finally stood up to prepare for bed, he felt grateful. Not for the conflict, not for the mistake, but for what it revealed. For the way it brought people closer, for the way it reminded him that every place becomes home only when people choose to treat each other like neighbors, not strangers. He turned off the lights, took one last look outside, and smiled quietly. This was just the beginning of something better, and he was ready for it.